we've got to keep an eye on NWSL off season as well, because that, of course, we should know that soccer never sleeps, and even if it's off season, there's always going to be some things to chatter about. We're going to dip into the news portion of this, some things that have broken over the last week. We have a coach resignation that we need to talk about a little bit, especially if folks have been very occupied with things like the World Cup or otherwise, and maybe you might have missed this on your radar. But Portland Thorns head coach Rhian Wilkinson resigned, and this is just about a month after winning the NWSL Championship. Made an announcement via her social media, long, lengthy note letter, sort of talking about the details of the reasoning for her resignation. Additional reporting by Meg Linehan in The Athletic on December 2nd, getting into some more details about everything. There was an investigation that took place, and the decision came after Wilkinson was investigated and ultimately cleared by the NWSL and NWSLPA joint investigation team. There was concern about her conduct as a head coach, and conduct that she ultimately reported to Portland's HR. And within that, saying that there was no evidence of coercion, abuse, or power imbalance or any other misconduct that was found, and that ultimately no league or team policies were violated. And I think this area is where there's some grayness, I think, for folks who were sort of taking in all the additional details, the additional reporting, the Athletic, and then sort of taking a look at what was in front of them, whether it was the release from the Portland Thorns or the personal statement from Wilkinson, but details within the reporting saying that there was an expression of mutual personal feelings between player and coach, and within that is an automatic power imbalance. And I think this is where Wilkinson had mentioned in terms of losing the locker room. Tough to get that back if players feel that there was a boundary or a line that was crossed. So 1 year with the Portland Thorns and led them to the 2022 NWSL Championship. And I don't know. I think in terms of next steps, Lisa, I'm curious if Wilkinson makes another leap to another team. What does that look like? Because when we saw this news drop, and as we were sort of reacting to it, even just to each other, messages, something that stood out, I think, for the both of us was the fact that there wasn't, because of the investigation kind of clearing any wrongdoing, that there's not an extra consequence that perhaps that we've seen over the course of the last year, where there's no like sort of banishment, like no one's barred from, pursuing work or in the NWSL, that type of consequence doesn't exist. Whereas maybe we saw something like that come out of the Richie Burke investigation, Cromwell and Green investigation. So I'm curious as to see, Wilkinson and her place in NWSL in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a big question mark at this point because, right, like Wilkinson's resignation had essentially nothing to do with the results of the investigation because she was cleared. There was no foul play. There was nothing wrong. But the fact that she lost confidence in the team because of that, she knew that she could never coach again at Portland with this group of players. So I think that that's also something that comes into play. I mean, this story, there are a million different layers to it, to be honest. So I think that her leaving Portland and her resignation in the way that it happened still leaves the door open to other opportunities in the league. I'm going to be honest. I think that it does with how she handled the situation. Her and the player went to HR. They did an investigation and everything was found out to be okay. But that still proves to be a power imbalance or whatever it may be. And other players didn't feel comfortable with that. So she decided to step away. Now, how she takes to do that in other leagues or in other places in the NWSL, other coaching opportunities, I can't imagine that she'll take a step back, not down the corporate ladder, but a step back in terms of she was a head coach, right? Like a head coach in the NWSL and ends up winning an NWSL championship. So she's got that on her resume. And I imagine some of the brighter things on her resume outshine this, in which there wasn't protocol for what to do when player and coach, and there are mutual feelings expressed between the two, and kind of how that goes about. Because between Rhian Wilkinson and player defender for Portland Thorns, Emily Menges, they both went to HR. At the time, we're not entirely sure. This was happening in mid-October. And then they went to HR and they submitted emails and text messages for this investigation to kind of say that where their situation was, to make sure there was no lines crossed and everything was kosher, and so to say. And the fact that it was, and there was no results of that, but the fact that she knew she had to resign. I mean, there's just so many different layers of it. Even in Meg Linehan's article by The Athletic, Rhian Wilkinson saying that she told club staff members that she was planning to stay on, and they felt uncomfortable, maybe they should move on. So like, that's also something that like adds a layer of this into it. Like, how now are the players around you and the people you work with around you feeling about this? It's so layered, but it opens another coaching vacancy in the NWSL for a very prolific team in Portland Thorns that are coming off of their third NWSL championship. They've re-signed some incredible players. There's still a lot of positives at Portland, but this also falls at the same time when Portland Thorns is under a bit of stress as a club with their ownership and following the Yates reports, because Paul Riley was a former coach at Portland. I mean, Portland has been in our mouths and the conversation of the news constantly for what feels like a year and a half now.
Yeah, it's been a pretty headline dominating couple of years, right? For this franchise. And I would imagine that for players it hasn't, these last 2 seasons haven't been easy seasons to navigate by any means. And to sort of look at how they kind of cap things off in 2022, maybe sort of having the feeling as if maybe it feels like, yes, there are things burning around this franchise, but perhaps, the players who are on the pitch, the players who are competing together with each other for titles, that appears to be, what I think folks were trying to rally behind. And then to sort of, get the additional reporting that came out and sort of see or read the things that kind of came to light. And, with Wilkinson saying like, ultimately the locker room is lost. You can't get that back. And they, as maybe there wasn't a consequence coming out of these joint investigations, but there was a consequence coming all the locker room and these players saying, we're asking you for your resignation. And Wilkinson saying, okay, here it is. I have to do that. It's December. I keep having to remind myself of that. It's December of 2022, and there's still some off season to go for this league. And I know there were a certain number of coaching vacancies going into the NWSL off season, and I'm curious. This is something that's the other side of this now that I think you and I are probably going to take a look at or keep an eye on. Who do you get to come in to this position to coach this team? That was part of the question mark around this team last year, and the departure of Mark Parsons. And that was a little different in the sense where they had some time and some buildup to take a look at candidates. They knew that Parsons was eventually going to leave at the end of the season and move on to an opportunity with the Netherlands national team. Now it's a little bit different. They've got a timeline. They've got a very specific kind of timeline in front of them. And how they're going to fill this position, or how soon. Like, is this something that's going to be?
And the draft is in a month, Sandra.
I was going to say, is this going to be a position that's going to be filled by the time the draft rolls around? If not, I mean, we saw, just for example's sake, we saw a team like the Chicago Red Stars have to navigate large chunk, really all of their offseason without a head coach in that seat, in that position. That so much of the offseason for that club was without a Petroselli, who did not join the team until mid preseason in February. So it's something to keep an eye on. And I think in terms of this team, even with so much that has come out of this franchise, I don't know how you, from a soccer perspective, look at this team, look at the roster in front of you, and as a coach, not say like that's a team that I want to coach.
Yeah, I mean, even like there are not like millions of coaches to choose from to come in and coach at this level with the pedigree, understanding the league. Because you touched on Mark Parsons, who was with Portland Thorns for years, and he left at the end of last year. He's already back in the NWSL with Washington Spirit. He went to the Netherlands and coached their national team for a handful of months, and then is back in the NWSL. But yeah, I mean, it's not a bad team to go to. You look at Portland, this is an incredibly talented team, a winning culture. They've got a lot of great pieces into place, and they're trying to turn that page, right?
Yeah.
To start a new chapter with this club, getting rid of all the bad stigma that came with it before, all of the coercion and everything that had happened in 2021 with Paul Riley formerly coaching there and the owners and everything. And this is, of course, not on that level of the coach resigning following an investigation where there was no wrongdoings said for the coach. But now it's kind of like, okay, who else do you bring in for this role? Who else is going to step in? It's not a hard sell to get someone to Portland, but what are the choices and who's going to make it there? And also you have about 30 days before the NWSL draft.
Yeah, no, it's we'll see. Young group, ready to, I think, compete and sort of take those steps into this next era of Thorns soccer. Reigning double MVP and Sophia Smith, Morgan Weaver, right? Sam Coffey. I think these are players that you look at and you say you want to build with them
Christine
and continue.
Sinclair. Like even you have the veterans to help you a little bit and bridge that gap with Christine Sinclair, Becky Sauerbrunn on these rosters.
Yeah, and in the midst of a World Cup year too, right? So there will be a lot of attention on the league for sure, in that sense. And it's talking about this in a way where maybe we're trying to talk about these chronologically. Lucy thinks that she's going to coach somewhere again, but maybe has to sit out a while. Maybe, like I said, it's a wait and see approach that we're taking on our end.